Welcome to our discussion on the shifting tides of history and power, where the very narrative of World War II is now being challenged by the current crises in Gaza.
Yeah, it's fascinating how a modern tragedy is, in a way, rewriting what we thought was an untouchable historical myth.
Absolutely. You see, the legacy of WW2 has long been the basis of Western moral superiority, but nowadays that so called moral high ground is being questioned as, current events like the Gaza crisis come into focus.
Right? And it's almost like these events expose an ongoing collapse, a sort of Western decline that not only rattles the old narratives, but also makes younger generations see a reality different from what they were taught.
Exactly, yeah. Now think about it. Historically, the Western narrative has been almost sacrosanct. Like it's been this almost untouchable benchmark. But now, with emerging powers like China and Russia stepping up, and the global South shifting alliances, the whole framework seems
Yep.
on shaky ground.
So, we're not just talking about armed struggles or political shifts, we're diving into a fundamental reconfiguration of what global legitimacy looks like, right?
Right, it's like the whole foundation on which Western governments built their legitimacy, essentially a narrative constructed around WP, is now proving to be more myth than reality. And younger people, they see the immediate impact in crises like Gaza instead of clinging to outdated historical flags.
Yeah, and that makes me think while the West still clings to that myth, there's an actual global reawakening, almost like a cultural and geopolitical pivot, where new alliances sprout up based on current real time events.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's spot on. The idea here is that morality, which was once predicated on ancient wars, is beginning to crumble under the weight of today's harsh realities. And the crisis in Gaza, for instance, acts as a kind of mirror. It reflects how these old justifications no longer hold, and people are questioning everything.
Exactly. And it's almost as if the narrative of greatness and moral superiority, bolstered by a heroic WB2 story, is being exposed as selective and ancient.
Yes, and what's truly interesting is how this reconfiguration is not just a top down phenomenon. There's a grassroots element where the global south is vocal and countries are realigning their interests independently of the old strategies.
Right. It's like the people on the ground, especially in regions like Gaza, are challenging these pretty long held worldviews. But I wonder, don't you think that dismissing the entire legacy of Western hegemony might be too quick a conclusion?
That's a fair point. I mean, on one hand, the narrative of W2 did play a critical role in shaping contemporary international relations. But now its very selective use to justify current policies is being called out for lacking nuance.
Yep. So, in a way, it's a bit of a double edged sword. History is used to legitimize action, but when the actions conflict with contemporary realities, the whole myth becomes a hurdle rather than a help.
Exactly. And there's this idea that ending the hegemony or moving toward a multipolar world might actually create room for a more balanced global order. Some even argue that this could lead to a more peaceful future, provided the transition is managed without chaos.
I see what you're saying. It almost feels like we're witnessing history in the process of being rewritten, where the uncontested narrative of the West is being deconstructed.
Yes, that's it exactly. And part of that deconstruction is how younger generations are no longer easily persuaded by a narrative that's decades, if not centuries, old. They look at things through the lens of, current crises like the Gaza situation, and they demand accountability.
And that's super interesting because it lays bare a conflict between the old guard and the modern reality. The West, steeped in its historical superiority narrative, finds itself challenged by a world where power is diffuse.
Right. And while the West's historical narrative once served as a kind of moral compass, today it's more like it's turning into a contested battleground of ideas, where clinging to past glories might actually get in the way of addressing present challenges effectively.
Yeah, right. So, do you think this shift in narrative could eventually lead to tangible changes in global policy? Like, could it promote more equitable, multipolar decision making on the world stage?
I think that's the hope many have. It's like the realization that if we dismantle this myth, we can make space for policies that reflect today's um, real power structures and human realities. But it's not without risk. There's a lot of inertia and vested interests that resist change.
And there's also the danger that some might romanticize the collapse of the old order, underestimating the complexity of transitioning to a new balanced system.
Yeah, exactly. It's not merely about tearing down a system, but reconstructing something that genuinely works for a multipolar world. And here, the crisis in Gaza is a vivid example of how current events force us to re examine these historical constructs.
Right. I guess this also touches on the role of media and public discourse. You know, how narratives get amplified or distorted in our digital age, which further complicates our understanding of events like these.
Absolutely. And what's particularly compelling is that while the Western narrative once served to unify under a common identity and purpose, today's media landscape is fragmented, making it easier for newer, less sanitized interpretations of history
Yeah, no.
to take hold.
And this fragmentation means that historical myths, like the enduring W. narrative, are in constant competition with real time raw events. This not only fuels skepticism of the old order, but also spurs a more immediate moral reckoning.
Right on. It's like the story of national pride is being challenged by the undeniable evidence of current humanitarian crises. One could say it's a necessary, albeit painful, evolution in public consciousness.
But here's a thought. Could it be possible that in dismantling the old narrative, we risk losing some of the historical context that, well, taught us valuable lessons?
That's a crucial critique. While it's important to update our perspectives, we must be careful not to erase history entirely. Rather, we need to, reinterpret it in a way that acknowledges both the past and the complications of today's world.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not about a wholesale rejection of history, but about embracing a more critical, multifaceted view that can better inform modern policies.
Precisely. It's like using history as a guide rather than as a blunt tool for justifying any current agenda. In the case of the Gaza crisis, what we see is a call for accountability that transcends the traditional narrative of Western righteousness.
Right. And that, in my view, is where the conversation really gains depth, because it prompts us to ask, what does moral authority look like in the 21st century when power dynamics are so fluid?
Exactly. It's like we're at a crossroads, a critical juncture where relying solely on historical myths no longer suffices. Instead, we need a more nuanced understanding that factors in current geopolitical realities, humanitarian crises, and the aspirations of a global population that's increasingly informed.
And with emerging global powers like China and Russia, the Old West is now sharing the stage in ways that force a recalibration of, global morality and leadership.
Right, and that makes the conversation incredibly dynamic. The rewriting of this narrative is not just an academic exercise, it's influencing actual policy decisions, alliances, and even how everyday citizens view their government's legitimacy.
Yep. So, looking ahead, do you think this shift in narrative might spark fundamental policy realignments on the world stage?
I do, though it's bound to be messy. It's like transitioning from a monolithic worldview to one that appreciates multiplicity. It's challenging, yes, but this dismantling of old narratives could pave the way for a more equitable global order if we manage the transition thoughtfully.
And while there's certainly a risk of instability, the potential for creating a more balanced system, one that truly reflects modern realities rather than an outdated myth, is definitely worth striving for.
Absolutely. The essence of this discussion is that historical narratives, like the Wabidoti myth, while powerful, are not set in stone. They must evolve with the times, much like global power dynamics, and the ongoing crises force us to do
Right.
just that.
Well, this has been an eye-opening dive into how history, myth, and modern crisis intersect. It really makes you think about the complexities of global morality and power today.
For sure. It's a reminder that while the past shapes us, we also have the power and the responsibility to reinterpret it as we move forward into an uncertain but potentially more just future.